Armed ranchers occupying a federal building in Oregon. Now, they're protesting the government's arrest of fellow ranchers. Is overheated political rhetoric partly to blame for inflaming this bizarre situation? Then President Obama kicking off the new year by kick-starting a push for gun control. We'll explain how he's going to go around Congress to do just that. And also, new year, new feud. Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio, tell me if this sounds familiar, fighting over the homeless problem. Will this cause more political problems for the beleaguered mayor? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Well, a remote national wildlife refuge is now the scene of an armed occupation. A group of protesters holed up in a federal building, and they're there to demonstrate against the punishment for some local ranchers. Inside the standoff, where dozens of militia members, some openly armed, they're camping out at this federal wildlife refuge, claiming that this land does not belong to the federal government, but to the people.
We have tried the prudent methods to get government to at least look at this and say, hey, there's something wrong here.
It started on Saturday, a rally originally protesting the jail sentence of Dwight and Stephen Hammond. The father and son ranchers are scheduled to report to prison today to serve a 5-year sentence for alleged arson fires on federal land.
I'm going to jail for 5 years for 127. Seems like a bit of an overkill. At
the rally, a small group broke off, with Nevada rancher Amon Bundy leading the takeover. The local sheriff calling the group's actions, quote, an attempt to overthrow the county and federal government in hopes to spark a movement across the United States, end quote. The Hammonds also adding that they don't support what's going on. They plan to report to prison peacefully.
I do not speak for the Hammonds, but we have spoken many, many times, and we understand each other on this issue. And the Hammonds are only going to jail because they just feel there's nothing else for them to do.
So you may ask, is this new? Has this been going on for a while? And what is at the root of some of this outrage? So far, the GOP presidential candidates, they're staying mum about this particular standoff, but their rhetoric in general, you can argue, has certainly played into, if not as an accelerant, certainly stoking the fires. Chris Christie, he's angry about President Obama's planned executive actions on guns. So the governor of New Jersey, he said the president wants to act like a dictator. Of course, Donald Trump, he's also chiming in, ramping up the anti-government rhetoric. Trump saying the government will soon prevent anyone from getting a gun. Of course, nobody's saying that but Trump. Now, a little later in the program, we're going to talk about how President Obama plans to act on guns, and then we'll talk to a local pastor about whether race is a factor in that armed standoff, not just in Oregon, but also in some of the scenes that we've seen closer to home. But first, our panel is here to talk about Oregon and what is also fueling some of, frankly, that stupidity. Harlan Hill is a Democratic strategist. Dominic Carter, of course, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And you know, Andrew, one of the things that's interesting is how people have described this nonviolent standoff. Do they call these people patriots? Do they call them armed terrorists?
It depends on whether you support them or oppose them. If you support them, then this is just a protest and they're freedom fighters. And if you oppose them, then this is an armed takeover and this is a hostage. Well, it's not a hostage situation, but it's it's a riot gone wrong. And it's, I think it does speak to some of the political divide and the discourse in this country. I'm not sure there's a link to some of the things that we've heard from the presidential candidates. And I really question people's ability to separate political rhetoric from actual reality. Yeah, for a long time we've said nasty things about not just this president, but lots of other presidents. But it seems like there's a greater influence that rhetoric has been carrying lately. And people are taking it to an illogical nth degree, whether it's Planned Parenthood or this thing.
After Ruby Ridge, there was a lot of people who didn't watch what they said after it. And they were pretty free and easy with throwing around terms like patriots and overreach by the feds and all the rest. Let's be clear here. A group of people decided they didn't like the law. And they were going to go home, get guns, and take over federal and state property and decide it's their own. And defy complete laws in the process. Now, because we're not talking about a building per se here, more of a tract of land or whatever else, I think cooler heads have prevailed to this point and people are trying to maybe talk behind the scenes what's going on. But I'm a little shocked that people are more acquiescing that, hey, you know, maybe in different parts of the country, this is crazy, this is completely illegal, and this is wrong. We'll get into the color aspect about maybe double standards in a second here, but this is more than a little dangerous, at least for me.
I'm a little bit surprised that even from the media, we're not hearing, you know, call a spade a spade. These are terrorists. These are armed terrorists on federal property, and I would call it an armed insurrection. And so I'd expect a little bit more from even the media, let alone the Republican candidates for the nomination.
I'm with you, Harlan, because I think these guys have gotten a pass at this point. They're expressing a difference of opinion or whatever else. No, you got guns. You went to a place that wasn't your own, and you decided basically that you were going to take it for your own. And to hell with federal law or even state law here, you're going to decide for yourself. And you don't like what the prosecutor did here, you'll take the law into your own hands. I'm saying, Dom, I've heard a lot of folks who want to play it carefully here on issues of guns or on issues of politics, especially in an election year. I'm with him. I think people are giving this thing a pass, and I've been going through some of the numbers here. When we talk about terrorists, what do we think about? We think about Muslims right now. We think about extremists. And they're real. Nobody's got to remind everybody what happened in Boston, what's happened in other parts of the world. Certainly, God knows everyone remembers what happened on 9/11. But when you look with the most amount of frequency of attacks and disturbances, and you get polling from law enforcement about some of the radicalization here, the anti-government types, these guys are involved on average in more problems than anything else law enforcement runs into. And this stuff's scary.
It's scary. Some would call it, for lack of a better term, the Obama effect. It's just something about this president that just, I don't know how to put my finger on it. It's just something. Do you sense the sarcasm?
Yes, I do. That he got a tan and a white, right? Yeah.
It's just something about this president that makes people feel that they're entitled to go take federal property and a protest. I'm not even dealing with the merits of why they're going back to jail. A federal judge has said that they got out earlier than what the minimum mandate calls for.
And by the way, the father and son reported to prison.
Right.
They actually went. It's
Right.
the other group who decided, well, you're not going far enough. We're going to take it a step further here. And this whole idea of sovereign, Americans, that they operate basically outside of the government and the state.
Sure.
It's not just a couple wackos in Oregon
But
here.
how did we get to this point where if you don't like a decision that the government's made, we were all taught in civics class or social studies, you work within the system, you get support, you change the law. This group and other groups, I don't think it's terrorism. They haven't destroyed anything. They haven't killed anybody. They haven't made any threats yet. But it is an armed insurrection. It's only because they don't like the government and think the government's encroaching. That's not the way to change this government.
Well, you're being too logical. To remember in Texas, when, by the way, presidential candidate and certainly somebody in the discussion, Ted Cruz, was acknowledging the rights of those folks to basically stop military exercises and guard against a secret government incursion that never was, that these Looney Tunes were doing, and somehow that was okay. To me, that was nuts.
You know what's incredibly revealing about all of this is that the natural reaction from the Republican candidates has been to talk about gun control. And this idea that is uniquely American, that we need guns to defend ourselves from government. I don't think that exists anywhere else. So much that it's written into the Constitution. I think that was a very revealing moment.
It's ridiculously illogical. Does anybody in their right mind think that let's say the government wanted you and we're coming, you really think that you can have all the weapons in the world
Drones,
and you're not going to
stealth bombers, yeah.
No, but you know what? We're being too polite here for a second, which is, this is crazy. Somebody's going to get hurt doing this stuff here, okay? You get a bunch of wackos with guns. Somebody's going to have to take them off land that's not their own. They're not all going to go willingly or quietly, and I hope they do. But I forget who it was in our morning meeting. They said, just pretend for a second somebody else had a problem with the government. And they were Black Panthers, okay? They were all armed here.
Did you say Black Panthers?
But do you imagine the conversation we'd have right now? Come on.
Black
it would
Panthers?
be much different, wouldn't it?
Black
Imagine what
Panthers?
Fox News would be doing. I mean, yeah. It's,
Black
and
Panthers.
I know we're going to get into this in more detail later on, but it feeds into the fear, and I've been reading it on social media all week, from African Americans who see the disparity in the treatment of blacks with guns versus
Stevie Wonder could see the difference in this situation. Richard, it's real simple. I don't want you guys to say
Well, you got 30 seconds to make it
at
quick,
6'10", that I'm playing the race card. But some of these folks are Looney Tunes, and they don't feel that Obama is legitimately the president. Let's cut through all the nonsense. 8 years in, they still don't believe he's the president of the United States.
Because they
8
wave
years
a
almost
flag
over.
that they selectively want to acknowledge, that makes them patriots. And then that somehow gives them a pass. I'm only saying, to me, this bothered me a lot more. Listen, where our program really focuses on issues, yes, national, but also in our region, has something to do with Oregon. The idea that I haven't heard the outrage from folks over this today, and it's not just my imagination, you guys agree with me, that is troubling. Because you don't get to just take up arms because you don't agree that there's a law on the books that you don't like.
Well, I mean, this shows the position that Republicans are in. That there's a gun problem, and they don't want to look as though they're being soft on guns to the
Andrew, thank you for that segue, because on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about just that. As those ranchers out west take up arms against the government, the president, he's getting ready to use an executive order to restrict some arms sales, and that is making those same folks we just talked about in the right wing even angrier with the commander-in-chief.